think about the power of Facebook and, our social media to spread misinformation and everything that's happened in that time, I go back to that because I think when we talk about sustainability, one of the biggest things we are battling is misinformation and how people are digesting the information that we have, because it's such a big, complex problem. Getting people to understand it is part of the battle that we're fighting.
Welcome back to Responsible Impact, a production of MagicLinks. We connect brands and influencers, and so this is the place where we take a good look at all things sustainability and e-commerce. When you zoom out from conversations about specific kinds of sustainability efforts or issues, you see a bigger system which relies on unsustainable practices in myriad places and ways. And of course, by unsustainable, we mean so out of balance they can't possibly go on much longer this way. It makes sense then that our conversations about how to move forward should take all of this into account. To do that, we need people thinking in creative, interdisciplinary ways. We also need people willing to stand up for what's right and to not be complicit in prettying up a fundamentally dirty thing. Many times creative programs are among the first cut from school budgets and are broadly considered the nice-to-haves, but not the must-haves. These talents are considered the most expendable. But pop quiz, which could you name faster? Politicians and scientists from the Renaissance, or artists from the Renaissance? The truth is that we need creatives the way we need all professions, and that they too have an important role in the sustainability conversation. Enter Katie Klencheski. She's a creative who has started her own agency, SMAKK Studios, based in New York. By combining her own talents and passions, she's working with brands to make a difference. A beautifully packaged, thoughtful, aesthetically pleasing, meaningful difference. Join us as we hear what Katie has to say about sustainability and the ways we can all answer the call for a better future, no matter what our job title.
My name is Katie Klencheski. I'm the founder of SMAKK Studios, which is a creative agency based in Brooklyn, New York. And most recently, we've really focused our offerings to support brands that are pursuing social impact, and sustainability is a big part of their missions and business plans.
There's kind of a hesitation on the part of the average John Q. public to think, well, if I don't immediately touch environmental issues in my work, am I really in a position to speak up for sustainability? And I think you're a really good example of somebody who's not stymied by that at all. Do you want to talk about your process and how you came to advocating for climate from where you are in a creative agency?
Yeah, absolutely. I've always been lucky in the 10 years of our agency that we've had some really amazing clients that work on the side of social impact and sustainability, but it hasn't always been 100% of our business. I found myself in a place where I did things on the side. I work with nonprofits and have my personal activism, but I found that I really wanted what I was doing at work to match up with my personal values in a way where there was nothing of me that I wasn't bringing to the table at work. And it's my agency. So if I don't feel that the work I'm doing matches up with all of my personal values, that's my own fault. So I went on a little bit of a mission to really think about how do I take what I know to be true, which is that the climate crisis is very real and we need some serious action to change it, to what I'm doing every day for 8 to, let's be honest, sometimes more like 16 hours a day. So, I started looking around and I had an opportunity to go to a training with the Climate Reality Project, which is Al Gore's organization. I went to that not really knowing exactly what I was going to come out of it with, but knowing that I was at a point where I really needed to think about how do I marry what I know to be true with what I'm doing every day, and not just in a let's recycle and compost kind of way. So I went into that training thinking that I was going to be kind of scared and worried that I was going to come out of it depressed, like the problem was too big and too scary and unsolvable. And what ended up happening was I met a lot of people who work really across all different professions, from government to teachers. There were fashion designers, there were actors and actresses, people who work deep in public policy and environmental science and academic. I really can't even impart the spectrum of people who were there, but really understanding that the music has stopped and there's not time left to completely change your profession or wait for a day where that feels right. We have to do stuff right now. So I really came out of that looking at, okay, there's kind of three areas. There's the things that I do at home, of course, which I have been doing. There's the pressure I put on the organizations that act on my behalf, like our government. And then there's the things that I do at work that have the opportunity to have a big impact. And, you know, the cause of the climate crisis is our economy. It's the companies that are and have been polluting for years and years and years, and it's causing global warming. And so the things that we do at work where we're interacting with companies and corporations and global supply chains, those actually have the opportunity to be a much bigger impact than the things that we just do at home and the choices that we make as individuals. I really looked at how can I take what I'm doing in a creative agency where we're interacting with and helping to grow brands, and we're also helping brands make choices about things like packaging and how they're going to partner with nonprofits and how they're going to kind of integrate sustainability into their storytelling and into the impact that they're doing, and really dig in there and look at how everything that I'm doing in every place where I am, how can I be an advocate for sustainability? So that was about a year and a half ago, 2 years ago, and we've pushed at SMAKK to make sure that everything that we're doing, we're really kind of checking it against a measure of sustainability and looking at how can we, in every single project that we're working on, bring sustainability into that project.
How did you sort of realize that the tools that you had could be repurposed and actually used very effectively towards serving a climate crisis?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the thing is every single person at every single level has something to contribute. I know that we have COVID going on. I know that we have all sorts of great tragedies, but this is the biggest challenge and we have about 10 years to solve it. Every single person, whatever your skill set is, you have something to contribute. And I really firmly believe that. As somebody who works as a creative in marketing, you know, what happens more often than not is our skills are used on the bad side of this. You know, our toolkit is used by the bad guys to make consumers choose something that's not the right solution. So if you look at a lot of the great stories of greenwashing, and when I say great, I mean big, not good, the people who are the biggest accomplices are the marketers. Look at recycling. Plastic recycling is something that is one of the biggest greenwashing myths out there. And the reason it was successful was because they had amazing marketing campaigns. It's marketers and really great creative campaigns that are the things that help people pull it off. One of the things for me, when I really looked at my history as a creative, there's some things that I've done that I'm super proud of. We've done some amazing work for a lot of really amazing brands that were sustainable before we really made this choice to go full throttle towards this. But I also have worked with some companies that I'm not proud of. More than anything, I was kind of horrified at the fact that my skills had been used by people that I didn't agree with. As creatives, as content creators, we're able to do what we call good work or good creative, oftentimes for companies that we might feel ambivalent about. But at worst, it's companies that are actually doing things that are pretty dubious. So one of the things for me was kind of changing the classification of what constitutes good work and saying it's only good work if it's doing it for companies that are worthy of it as kind of a first step. And then looking at, okay, when I am working with minded companies and companies that I respect and I really want to see do well in the world, how can we even amplify that further, and how can we add more to that, and how can we make sure that sustainability is represented even further? And I think that was the first thing, is kind of as a creative recognizing the power that advertising and creative and marketing campaigns have in the world to change people's minds, and then also to look at who deserves my time and talent.
This reminds me of something that you may or may not have been aware of, and I remember reading a number of years ago, but that the tobacco industry was actually ultimately perfectly complacent or fine at the end of the day with having those really ugly smoking warnings being put on cartons of cigarettes, because they had neurological research that showed that for already addicted smokers, even a mention of smoking in the context of it killing you incited the neurological cascade that made them want to smoke. And they knew that actually those messages were not a deterrent, but a very perverse and effective form of advertising.
Yeah.
So that kind of thing just comes to mind where you're like, yeah, you know, like we all have to use our powers for good and not evil.
Yeah. And actually, you know, towards that analogy, this is something I think about all the time. I think it must have been like 2013. I was at South by Southwest, and it was right around the time that we were really starting to realize like how sticky digital experiences can be with the kind of feedback that you can create in user experiences. And I remember going to I think it was a case study presentation that someone gave, and it was all about psychological triggers that you can use to get people to click the buttons that you want. We work in the digital space. So many of our brands are direct to consumer. So, all of that information is super relevant. And it was really, we forget this, but that was like 7 years ago. And a lot of the things that we think of as just conventions now were being invented at the time. And someone went through just really persuasive, awesome case study that just showcased all these things you could do with color and hover states and things that really help people say, okay, this is the thing to click on. This is what I should do. And at the end of the presentation, everybody's asking great questions. And this one guy stood up and he was like, does anybody feel like maybe this is how it felt at Philip Morris when the doctors told them that nicotine was addictive? And everyone was just kind of quiet. It's like, oh my God. And I remember that Thursday, we're just starting to realize that. And you think about the power of Facebook and, our social media to spread misinformation and everything that's happened in that time. I go back to that because I think when we talk about sustainability, one of the biggest things we are battling is misinformation and how people are digesting the information that we have, because it's such a big, complex problem. Getting people to understand it is part of the battle that we're fighting. The war of misinformation around climate change and fossil fuel emissions has been going on really since the early 70s. So this is something where just by putting enough out there to cause doubt, and this was, make no mistake, this was one of the biggest campaigns of propaganda and misinformation that has ever existed. And I feel that we absolutely lost that war. But the reason why the next generations aren't going to be as susceptible to that misinformation is climate change is happening. So in some ways, there's only so much cognitive dissonance you can have when we have fire seasons that are so bad that just 3 entire states on a map look like they're lit up when you watch the nightly news. Or when we have so many hurricanes in a year that they run out of names for them. We're at a point where it is so real and so tangible that as dedicated and successful as that misinformation campaign was, I think we're going to be asking people really to kind of look cross-eyed to be able to believe that the climate crisis isn't happening. I've definitely had people say crazy things to me like, oh, it's just from volcanoes, or, there are that's definitely, there's always going to be some idiots out there, but, are they key decision makers? Usually not. We need to obviously keep fighting for it in the room, but reasonable people know that this is a real thing. The problem with misinformation is it's now moved online completely. And it's not just a fossil fuel company putting out campaigns of misinformation. We have all sorts of really nefarious agents kind of doing it about many different things. And this is where we get into talking about how tech and media companies need to handle this. And I really don't have the solutions. It scares me.
Yeah, agreed. If a client is just really not in values alignment, how do you find yourself politely declining working with them? And I ask this because I'm certain there are other creatives who are in the same place and could use help with delivering that no.
Yeah. For us, it was a process of getting to where we are now. So where we are now is we're super lucky in that we're being tapped by really amazing startups and growing companies that are pursuing sustainability, trying to integrate it more, or start new companies that are completely based on that. We're also working with really awesome global houses of brands that are adding or incubating new companies in their portfolios that are becoming sustainable, in the space of beauty and skincare and wellness and consumer goods, which is where we typically operate. Before we really said, hey, this is the only kind of client we're going to work with, we had to make a choice to get smaller before we got bigger. It took kind of setting a date and saying, okay, this from this date forward, we're only going to say yes to the companies that align with our values. And we defined them internally. To do that, I did have to look at our staff count and say, okay, we're going to be able to hang on to this many projects, and these projects are not going to be renewed. Then the new projects that we take on, we'll have to project what we think that looks like from a new business standpoint. It ended up being completely the right call. We are lucky to be super busy and working with just some really tremendous companies right now. But we had to kind of make a strategic decision and really look at kind of all the factors that would go into that from a business side to be able to feel strong in that. One of the things that we do look at is I don't expect all of the companies that we work with to be sustainable when they knock on our door, but oftentimes the process of working together is integrating sustainability into what they're doing. So can we take this toothpaste brand and move them into a refillable packaging format? Or can we help this brand connect with a nonprofit partner to become carbon neutral? They might not be that when they walk in the door, but it's going to be a part of the process and working together, and knowing that that's something they're working towards is one of the criteria that we look at when we're working with any brand.
How do you talk about what's happening? And I think that this is twofold. How do you talk about what's happening with climate with clients who aren't already on board? And then also out in the world as just a person talking about it. What do you find is a really quick and easy way to catch people up? I know.
There isn't a quick and easy. I mean, everybody's coming to conversations from where they are. First off with clients, when I decided that we're really going to lean hard into how do we become agents of sustainability at SMAKK Studios, I knew that a really important part of this was going to be building the business case for sustainability. And it's not about saying, hey, you need to do this really expensive thing because I say it's good. It cannot be that. It has to be based on, listen, we know that consumer data is telling us that Gen Z is poised to become the largest group of consumers within the next 3 years. Here are the things that are most important to them, and really understanding it from a consumer behavior standpoint, and knowing that when they rank issues that are important to them, climate change typically ranks towards the top, and they're looking for companies to solve those problems. So being able to fluently say, hey, 68% of buyers in the US are what we call belief-based, and they're looking for companies that reflect their values. And if you're targeting women between the ages of 30 and 40 years old, these are the things that they care about. Or in the past 10 years, brands that market with sustainability as a focus have grown 5.6 times the rate of other consumer brands. That helps convince people who are controlling budgets that, hey, maybe we should invest in this sustainability thing. And I think being able to be fluent in why it's not just a good decision for the earth, but it's a good decision for the group that you're speaking to. That's really important, because traditionally we've been kind of told, usually by the folks that are trying to say that it's not a good business decision to be sustainable. They say it's too expensive and there's not a return on investment. But if you can prove that there's a return on investment, I think that can be one of the largest convincers. But more and more, I'm finding that people who are knocking on our door don't need convincing. Brands that we work with, usually by the time we're having our first conversation, they know enough about us as an agency. And the reason that they've come to us is because they have social impact and sustainability at the heart of what they're doing. And they're looking for more ways to reach the consumers that they know that's going to resonate with. And it's our job to help make them really successful.
What do you see being done right now as it pertains to marketing, but also just generally with climate, that you really love and think we should be doing more of?
I think one of the things that we're seeing a lot of is innovation in the packaging space, which is something that's super important when we look at how much packaging waste there is, and also how many emissions are spilled on the behalf of products that we're moving around the globe. So I think there's just some really cool stuff happening. I mean, we're working on some packaging programs right now where we're looking at mushrooms and fungus that grows into shape of what you need. Yeah.
We actually did an episode about this very topic. It's episode 114 with Dr. Mitchell Jones. His work is pioneering this exact thing. It's called The Answer Just Might Be Mycelium. If you haven't heard it already, go check it out after this.
It's just cool, futuristic, fun stuff to talk about. We're working on all sorts of fun innovations. We're finding that old kind of dusty brands are really interested in what they can do Nobody wants to think about going to some beautiful beach and having your empty products wash up on shore because they are floating around in the ocean. So I think every brand is starting to consider that. And when I put on my creative geek hat, I get really excited about a lot of the packaging innovation that we're seeing.
When you think about the kinds of ways that things can message that will really echo and sort of carry themselves across audiences, does anything come to mind?
We've always found that the more personal things can be, the better they tend to do. Personal stories carry more weight than generic brand stories. So I always get really excited when we work with a brand that has a really cool founder story, because I know that that means we have more raw emotional material to work with when we're crafting brand stories. And we see those tending to do really well. We worked with a brand called the Honey Pot Company, the feminine care brand, and working with that brand, they have an amazing founder at the helm who just was always willing to be the personal voice behind the brand. And so when we get to work with those brands, we see how much traction they get and how much further those brands go than the brands that are just kind of made by a bunch of guys sitting at a conference table.
The story of climate justice is a story of justice. And with that, I think, I'm sure you'd agree that to only talk about saving like the plants and animals and the carbon cycle and not talk about like the human lives that have been impacted is not a clear-eyed way to go about it. And so, of course, these rising conversations about like racial justice and environmental racism have been happening. How do you work to integrate, and what do you think is the role of creatives in bringing equitable creative to this conversation, and then also just to the work of creatives in general, separate from anything that's climate related?
In a lot of ways, we're making the touch point between a brand and consumers in the content that we create and the campaigns we make. So I know for us, one of the things that became really important in how we kind of thought about our process was how are we making sure that there's representation, making sure that we're thinking about who it's for. And we've had different people on our team become the people who are thinking about, is there representation in this creative? Same thing with thinking about people who are differently abled, especially in the digital space. Is this accessible? When we're creating packaging programs, it becomes, is this sustainable? Does this meet these checks and balances? All those ways that different groups haven't been represented or thought about as an end user. I think that has to be a part of the creative brief and really baking that into everything that you're doing. I mean, we talk about how are we talking about gender in this project. When we talk about our consumers, is it an inclusive consumer that we're thinking about? We think about how we kind of structure what the assignment of the project is and then put ourselves through some checks and balances along the way to make sure that we're representing the different groups that we need to.
That's such a key phrase, checks and balances. I mean, we could just almost wrap up right there. The whole thing, guys, just checks and balances. Let's dive into more of the let's start with plastics. How about we just, take it away?
It's so problematic. Yeah.
I know. But I want them to hear it from your voice. So you just,
there's so many feelings about plastic. So, I mean, I think like one of the big moments of awareness for me, just how big of a lie recycling is. I grew up in the 90s and I remember when everybody started sorting their trash and thinking it was like, oh my God, we're going to save the planet. The truth is, and there's, a really great recent piece that NPR, I think it was Radio Lab or Planet Money did about plastics recycling. Plastics recycling wasn't invented by a government agency that wanted to, make sure that people recycled their plastic. It was invented by the plastics industry so they could keep making virgin plastic. In the late 80s, early 90s, there was an awareness that, hey, this stuff, plastic and things like foam containers that were used for fast food, they were like, this stuff just isn't going away. This is becoming a problem. And the environmental movement around the same time or a little bit before that started saying reduce, reuse, and recycle was the last thing, it's the last resort. The plastics industry realized that they needed to do some big stuff or people were going to stop using plastic and start demanding that alternative materials be used instead of plastic because there was a growing plastic waste problem. So they brought this idea of recycling plastic, which they knew was not really a viable solution because it's too expensive, because plastic really can only be recycled 2 times, most of it, and because some of it is just really too difficult to even recycle. But they knew if they could get people to start sorting plastic and feeling like, hey, I'm not throwing it in the trash, I'm throwing it in this other thing, that would psychologically be enough for people to not be adverse to buying plastic. And so that began a decades-long campaign that was really all about marketing and PR campaigns and getting local communities to start sorting trash, even though in the end, really it's 9 out of 10 pieces of plastic that get thrown into recycling end up as waste and don't get recycled. Some of it gets thrown in the ocean, some of it ends up in landfills, and even worse, some of it gets burned, which is just adding kind of insult to injury. So the plastics recycling, is a huge problem. Some plastics get recycled more successfully than others. Like if you flip over any plastic container, it has number 1 through 7 on the bottom with the little recycling symbol, and some of those are recycled at a higher rate than others. But we have all sorts of issues, like mixed materials together is one of the big issues that I deal with a lot because we're doing a lot of skincare and cosmetics packaging where you have things like pumps, which really can only be made with plastic as they are right now. So they have metal plus plastic, which means that they're never going to get recycled. They'll always end up as waste. And then we just have issues with things getting sorted the wrong way. And then also plastic recycling is really cheap and it makes more economic sense for people to make products out of virgin plastic than recycled plastic in most instances. So we have a big problem there.
It is gaslighting at the biggest scale, I think, to tell people that, yeah.
Absolutely. And I think one of the other things that, like this year, we saw the value of oil got so cheap. It was less than zero at one point, which my brain doesn't totally comprehend. But people forget plastic is made out of oil, most of it. And the majority of our plastic comes from oil. And the oil companies, as we're shifting away from using as much, are going to want us to consume more plastic because they need to do something with the ground that they've invested in that they're pulling oil out of. I get nervous when oil becomes cheaper and oil companies are already getting government subsidies. That just makes plastic cheaper and cheaper and cheaper. And when you're working with a client and saying, hey, let's look at glass or this other alternative material, and they're like, but it costs 13 times as much as doing a virgin plastic packaging program, it's really hard to make that case when things become so cheap. So that's one of the biggest problems we have with plastic is it's the easiest solution. And it's usually the easiest thing for any company to say yes to and just decide it's somebody else's problem, ultimately the consumer's problem. And then we feel good about sorting it into different bins. And then it's everybody's problem again.
Is there anything else that you're like, I actually want to talk about?
One of the things that I do just want to talk about is the fact that if you are creative and you're working for yourself or working for somebody else, I think one of the most important things you can do is to kind of commit to yourself that you're going to work towards sustainability in your work. And what that means is if you're at a company where that's not something that's a part of every conversation, be the person at the table who brings it up and push for change. And if it's not in your job description, write it in yourself. We're at a place where we can't afford to say like, oh, that's a different department or somebody else, has that in their job description. They'll take care of it. This is the kind of thing where it has to be a part of everybody's job. So wherever you are, you need to really think about what can I do? How can I push for this? And if you're constantly being met with, we can't do that, we won't do that, then go find another company you can work for that's going to be receptive to that or another client you can work for. But, I think that it's kind of, okay, how can I push for change in this situation? And if I'm not successful, how can I take my time and talents and put them in a place where they will be successful? Because the companies that aren't willing to change don't deserve the best talent.
I can actually personally attest to this. It becomes not really like a nice to have, it becomes like you have to do it at a certain point.
Yeah. I mean, I think that the biggest problem is that I think people don't feel that they have the personal agency to do that a lot of times, but yeah. It really is going to take everybody moving towards this and quickly because we don't have time left. We really just don't. We have to be working on solutions. We can't be, still kind of convincing ourselves that it's something we can do next year.
Yeah, enabling is actually the word that comes to mind.
Yes.
Is there anything else? Any parting notes? Any funny quotes or last words before we?
Oh, I wish I had been funnier.
Stop.
I'm such a downer. Yeah.
No, listen.
No, I think, what I do want to leave us with is I think one of the biggest things that I've learned from the Climate Reality Project, and also in, just becoming more active in this space, is that we actually really do have the tools and solutions in front of us. This isn't something that we can't solve. It's something that we have to solve, and it's something that we're developing the tools to solve. We just need more people committed to it. So I think, it's really, this is something we can do. It's just going to take a lot of focus.
I think you're actually a harbinger of good news. Don't feel like you're being too negative. It's important. And because really the only way forward is this way. And so kudos for you for being like, guys, this way. We got it. It's time.
Share this episode with your friends, especially your creative friends. Share it with your neighbor, your accountant. Do the subscribe and review thing. And then ask yourself where you can help. We need you. Join us. Credits this episode go to Hazel Shin, Brian Nickerson, Ashley Dong, Carrie Jewell, and the lovely Katie Klencheski. If you're in the market for excellent creative, be sure to visit her agency, SMAKK Studios. They're at SMAKK Studios with an S.com. I'm Natalie, and I'm out. Till next time, gang.